Today we're going to go over the feudal system, which if you remember on your pre-test, there was that question that asked you guys if or why the European countries had to change their system of government. Does anybody remember why? Blake?
The armies to keep themselves safe.
Right, so we had those Germanic tribes, so the Anglo-Saxons, the Visigoths, all those guys that we talked about last week, were kind of raiding these European countries, and the Europeans needed a new system to help them defend their countries. So they came up with, well, they didn't come up with it, they adapted the feudal system. So here is a picture, and I want you guys, oh, sorry. Okay, so today's question is, how did the feudal system impact the lives of people in Europe? So as we move through the lesson, I want you guys to keep this question in your head. How did the feudal system impact the lives of people in Europe? And when we're finished, you will be able to answer this question in your summary on your note sheet. So take a look at this picture. Very visually appealing. How do you think this picture represents feudalism? I want you to turn to a partner. You guys can be a group of three and talk about, how do you think this picture represents feudalism? What do the little symbols mean? What's the emphasis of the pyramid? So talk with a partner or a group of three. Yes. Knights and yes. Bread. How about bread? So this little level has a symbol. What does the symbol? I am too. What does the bread mean? What are the swords mean? I guess
yeah, I hope that's evil. Me, I do not. I said Concord. I'm like, rats.
I think girls.
Queen, the pyramid, queen. Yeah, that's like the person in charge. Then we have crowns.
All of them people like nice.
Okay, so who wants to volunteer? What does this picture mean? How does it represent feudalism? What do the symbols mean? Shyla.
Is that bread?
Yes.
Okay, the
Those are
bread
slices
means
of
like
bread.
for the poor people.
Mm-hmm.
The swords mean obviously for the knights and like the people that fought in the war.
Okay.
And then the crosses are for like the priests and like the religious people. And then of course the crown for the king.
For the king. Good. Why are they stacked up like this? Why is it a pyramid structure?
Who's in charge?
Right, to show who's in charge. Do you think that the number of pictures or the largeness of the pictures has anything to do with the population? Yeah. So maybe, of course, we know there was only one king. So then there's a few nobles, a few religious leaders, a few more knights, then there was thousands and thousands of peasants, or in this lesson we'll call them serfs. So, good job, guys. On your Chromebooks, you are going to get on Google Classroom. Go to our classroom page and find the assignment, the Feudal System Notes. On this assignment, it'll bring up your note sheet. It's a simple graphic organizer, and you are responsible for taking notes. Do you have your treasure? There's an outlet right there. And give me a thumbs up when you get that pulled up. house.
Yeah, I talked to Andy about it. You want me to check what else?
Yeah, real quick. Okay.
Not.
Okay, looks like everyone's on there. All right. So, last class I gave you guys a notes sheet that I created. So this time you guys are creating your note sheet. So I gave you the template. You are responsible for the information that you put in there. On each slide, I have underlined certain things that I think are important and that you should put on your note sheet. But you are turning this in for a grade, so make sure you have it filled out. If you have any questions or you missed something, just raise your hand and we'll go back. All right, so this diagram is kind of our diagram of the class period. We're going to keep coming back to this diagram just because this is feudalism. This is what it is. So we start with the king, who grants lands to the barons, who grants land to the knights, who grants land to the villains or the peasants or the serfs. This is not the same villain as like an evil person, okay? This is represent a word that represents poor, okay? So in feudalism, each level gives something to the level below it, and each level gives something to the level above it. And you'll see that represented as we move through this. So the first one we're going to talk about is the king. So you'll go to the king section on your note sheet. The king was in complete control of the feudal system. So the feudal system revolved around the king. Sam, we need to be typing these out, bud. The king controlled who leased the land. So the king controlled all of the land in his area, and he controlled who leased it from him. So if you're going to lease land to somebody, you want to make sure you can trust them. You also want to make sure that they can afford it. So he only leased land to people that were wealthy. When they took the lease, when they signed up to have the land, they had to swear an oath of fealty. So when you swear an oath of fealty, that means that you won't ever use this land against the king. So you won't ever use it to plot a plan to get him out of the king. You won't use it to trade with the enemy, nothing like that. So they had to swear an oath whenever they leased land. These people that leased the land were called barons, and we'll get more into that here in a minute. But the gist of them is they are wealthy, powerful, and they had complete control of the land that they leased. So the king had control of all of this land. He gave part of it to a baron. The baron was the sole controller of his land. Does that make sense? When they had this land, they could use it for whatever they needed. So most of them were farmers. It's kind of like a township. So if the king controlled the county, the baron was like the mayor of a town, and everybody in the town worked for him. Does that make sense? Yes.
How do you get to where you can type on here? I don't know. Since I have to send a request to the owner.
Are you in the class? Should be. I'll go accept it real quick. Is anybody else having that issue where they can't type into the note sheet? No? Okay. Okay, can you type now?
It says you're in it, and then you can, but I can't.
Okay, I just shared it with you. back to this graphic, this chart. So we talked about the king grants land to the barons, right? So the king is like we can call him, a better representation would be the governor. So the king's the governor, and then the barons are like the leader of the county. They own the county. So what do the barons do with the land? So these barons establish their own taxes. They establish their own system of justice, and they have their own currency. So if you traveled from one area to the next, you were going to find different money, a different court system, different laws, all that. They were the ones that established that within their land, within their fief. So, like I said, in the feudal system, each person gives something to the class below it, but they also give something to the class above it. So, what do the barons give the kings? They give back to the king by serving on the royal council. They also pay rent. Anytime you lease land from somebody or lease a house, you pay rent. And they also provided the kings with knights. So that is what they gave the king. These barons were allowed to have families. They were allowed to marry. And these barons were in control of the land up until the king says no. So it can move down throughout their families, or it could stop with one family and the king could say nope and lend it out to another family. Did you get it, Rachel?
Yeah.
Any questions about the barons? Okay, so back to our graphic organizer. The barons are going to grant land to the knights. And remember, by granting land to the knights, they are having it so the knights provide protection and military service to them and also to the king. Does that make sense? So, the knights are given land by the barons. And they must protect the baron's family, as well as the land. If they were sent higher up, like let's say to the castle, they now belong to the king. They no longer belong to the baron. When the baron gave this land to the knights, they could keep as much as they wanted of it, and then the rest would go to the serfs or the peasants or villeins. So they kept as much as they wanted for themselves, and then they would lease it to the next class below. So as you can see, this is kind of like a cycle where the king has all the land. He grants part of it to the barons, who grants part of it to the knights, who grants part of it to the serfs. So it's kind of like a stair step down there. Later today, we will go more into what life was like for a knight, and I will also have you guys do an activity to find your family's coat of arms. So it's pretty cool. Okay. Now we'll go to the serfs. So remember, I said the knights keep as much of the land as they want, give the rest to the serfs, to the peasants. Who can give me some characteristics of what a peasant would be? What is their life like?
Like a farmer, kind of poor.
Right. Is their clothing top notch?
No.
No. Do they have a lot to eat? No, because they provide food and free labor in their service to the knights. So it's their job to feed the class above them. That is what they give them. Which is why on that first picture, the peasants or the serfs, their picture, their little graphic was toast, like pieces of bread. Because that, for the most part, that is all they really had to eat. Because they were providing meat and fruits and vegetables to the knights above them. So they would just kind of get the scraps. These peasants, these serfs, had no rights. They were literally slaves, and that is how they worked. But they did get to live on the land. So that was kind of a reward for them, was to be able to live on the land. However, they were not allowed to leave it. So they couldn't travel to another township or anything else. They had to stay in their area. They also were not allowed to marry without the Lord's permission. So when a baron owns his land, he is now the lord of that land. And so in order for a serf to get married, they'd have to get permission by the baron. But they were still allowed to have families in their households, of course. But they just weren't living the best life. So, any questions about the serfs?
Do they ever have any like uprisings of the serfs?
There's like a few, but there's not, especially in this time period that we're talking about, there's not like one big riot that they had. This is like the 11th and 12th century is what we're talking about. So what years is that? 1100 and then 1100. So really, this was a new system for them. So everybody was just trying to adapt. And because the peasants came from nothing before, with this system, they were given land. So that was a big deal for them. So it's kind of a step up on the ladder, even though they were still living poor lives. So when you get closer to like the 14th and the 15th centuries is where you see more uprisings as far as peasants and people rebelling back, especially like with the French Revolution, which I won't cover that in this class, but Mr. Crawford will after I leave. So, but yeah, so that's where you kind of see that big uprising. But here, everyone's just trying to get used to the system. So, good question. Okay, so back with your partner or partners, were your initial thoughts on this picture correct?
Yes.
Is what you thought, remember my question was, how does this picture represent feudalism? Were you correct? For the most part. If you were not correct or you were almost correct, what were you missing? What was the piece of the puzzle that was missing? Talk amongst your friends. I feel like for the most part you guys are pretty on target with this picture. I think you guys have a good understanding of feudalism. So, okay, on the bottom of your note sheet, everyone should see there's a little section that says summary. Everyone see that? Okay, you are going to take 5 minutes to summarize feudalism in 3 to 5 sentences. So everything we just talked about, you're going to summarize it in 3 to 5 sentences. And I should have said this at the beginning, but I forgot. Feudalism and the feudal system are interchangeable. So it's the same thing. So if you hear me say either or, it's the same. When you're finished, you need to, Google Docs automatically saves, but you need to submit it in Google Classroom. So if you don't know how to do that, just let me know and I'll help you. But 3 to 5 sentences, you can talk about how people have to give and what people get. You could talk about the characteristics of each section, each level. you're having trouble coming up with stuff, take a look at your notes. If you think about it, we went over 4 levels. So if you write a summary sentence of each, that would get you your 3 to 5 sentences. So then you can just hit turn in. Yep. On your Google Doc, there should be a button that says turn in. So when you are finished, you just hit that button and that turns it into Google Classroom. So. Have 2 more minutes.
Wait, we turn it in when we're done with summary?
Yep, that's good. Okay. When you're done, I want you to keep your Chromebooks open, but I want you to shut it lightly. So you don't shut it all the way, but just shut it so I know that you're done. Can I borrow this? So like Jordan's is like this. So this lets me know she's done, but not completely closed it because we're still going to use it, okay? Yes, Rachel?
There's no turn-in button.
Well, yours is shared with, hers is different, because I shared it with you, so I have access to it, so.
Yeah.
Can you go to the assignment and mark it as done?
Oh.
Okay,
There's-
yep, so I have it on my Google Docs.
Okay.
For those that are still finishing up, you have about 1 more minute. Remember to slightly close your Chromebook when you're done so I can tell that you're done. Yes. Yes, that is our activity at the
I was like, cause I was in my Google Docs and I was like, when did this get here? I never put this here.
That's our assignment for the end of class.
Okay.
So. Okay, if you're not finished, that's okay. You'll have some time at the end of class to get it finished up and turned in. But we are gonna keep rolling. So, what was the life of a knight like? So, we are going to watch this video.
This video has been sponsored by the Great Courses Plus. You may know who they are, but if you don't, it's a service where you have instantaneous access to lectures by top professors. One of these lectures actually inspired the creation of this video, so stay tuned till the end of the video to find out more. While various types of soldiers throughout history are often romanticized, few are more adored than the medieval knight. Our conventional idea of knights existed during the High Middle Ages, that's around the 11th to 14th centuries. Although knights rode across battlefields well well before 1000 AD. So by removing the myth and glamour that society has put on these past soldiers, let's answer a few questions. Why were knights needed? What were their lives even like? The most important thing to understand about knights is that they were not just warriors in heavy armor riding on horseback. Sure, that would be a pretty accurate description, but at the same time, knighthood was about more than just being a soldier. Being a knight solidified your place in society. While the social classes of the Middle Ages are often grossly oversimplified, that could be another story, they were not nearly as complex as our modern society. So to sum it up, in this medieval society, you could be a worker, a member of the church, or a fighter. If your purpose was with the military, you had a level of nobility. Nobles ranged from kings and queens at the top to knights at the bottom. Landowning knights had a better standing than knights living in another man's castle or on another man's land, but even the lowliest knights had a certain level of respect granted due to this nobility. I mean, at least they weren't peasants. The origins of knights date back to the days of Charlemagne, and arguably the Roman Empire. Before the First Crusade, all fighters on horseback were knights. It wasn't a well-regarded status symbol, just a name. In fact, it would be perceived as disrespectful to call a high-ranking member of society a knight. Any horseback soldier could identify as a knight, and no benefits came from this title. You don't need to be born into nobility, just a soldier with a horse. This would change as the Middle Ages progressed, especially by the High Middle Ages. The Catholic Church had previously held contempt for battle in war for clergy members, since, killing is in fact a sin. At first, the church would use outside factions and fighters for protection and whatnot, but lack of devotion and other disagreements made these secular warriors inadequate. As protection became increasingly more important for small areas, such as housing for the poor, a new fighting force was needed. This would come with soldiers knighted by lords and kings. They would be an inclusive group. Random citizens would not often be considered for knighthood, although it wasn't impossible. Instead, knights were usually the firstborn son of a previous knight. This gave a certain level of weight to the status and legacy to the title, and made sure the class order wasn't dissolved. They fought for the church and held this in high regard. After all, religion and politics was one and the same in Europe at this time, and knights had a place in society never replicated by succeeding warriors. Knighthood was held to a high standard. A code of chivalry would dictate how they would act at all times. Included in this were the expectation of courtesy, honor, truth, and fighting for those who cannot protect themselves. Ideally, this should have been followed by all knights, but as this is human nature, not all followed the code. Chivalry also functioned as a standard of morality for the fighters. Rather than fight for personal wealth, fame, or glory, battles would be for the church, and what was to be perceived as the greater good. Again, this was not a rule followed by all knights, but it was a nice idea. So what was a standard knight like? First, what everyone cares about, the tools. They were armored in a layer of cloth, followed by chainmail and a tunic. This is overly simplified, but over the centuries, knight armor would gradually become more plated to deal with arrow fire. The helmets would vary from location to location, but the narrow visors traded visibility for protection. The primary fighting style of the knight was to lance, aka stab, an opponent on horseback. A horse could travel over 40 miles an hour, so the momentum of the horse combined with the long weapon could easily pierce armor and result in a kill. This was a skilled craft, and was one of the largest variables differing a knight from a civilian fighter. Swords and shield combat knowledge was also a necessity, but it would be preferable to stay on horseback, away from most of the danger. Wealthy knights would put armor on their horses, just for protection from those arrows that could easily kill your trusty steed. In the chaos of battle, identifying an individual knight would be nearly impossible from sight alone, so the coat of arms was introduced. Coat of arms would follow standards of heraldry and identify a knight and all of their kin. To follow this, last names developed in Europe to identify nobles with ease. A last name would endow you with rights and class placement. So, what would a knight's training look like? Well, if you fit the criteria explained earlier, you would be sent to a castle, raised by a foster parent for several years, and at the age of 7, you would become a page. You would learn basic training skills in hunting, courtesy, and maintenance of equipment. At 14, you would become a squire and earn a sword. You would become proficient at fighting, riding a horse, and fight alongside a knight. By 21, you would be able to earn your knighthood. In this event, the lord or king would give you the title of knight. and place his sword upon your head and neck. This tradition represents how his power could kill you with ease. This is a pretty good representation of knighthood in general. Being a knight was a lifestyle, and death was a common occupational hazard. During peace times, knights would take part in tournaments, generally a massive public affair. The knight would take part in fighting another knight. The banner would bear the coat of arms, and a knight would be responsible for maintaining the honor of himself and his family name. The tournament would begin with a joust. Two knights would mount their horse and charge at each other with a lance. If one is hit, they may be knocked off or killed. A joust can turn into a grounded fight with specified weapons and rules. In the result of a knight losing, the winner can choose whether to kill him or not. Acting within the codes of chivalry, a knight would not kill his opponent, but again, this wasn't always a guarantee. Tournaments were actually frowned upon by the church, who wanted to forbid them, but their popularity made this impossible. Tournaments were a brilliant sport to the spectator, with some very high stakes for the loser. As the years progressed and technology improved, the era of the knight had come to a close. Bows and crossbows had made the techniques of the knight far less practical, and had allowed far less skilled fighters to compete and win. Archery had become recreational to many, so there were plenty of soldiers capable with a bow. As guns became more commonplace on the battlefield, the knight was phased out entirely. In the modern day, the perception of knights is often skewed. The lives they led were not like the romanticized fiction we have become accustomed to. In reality, knighthood was not necessarily a privilege or a burden, it was just a way of life. This video was inspired
lots of information in that video. I like the graphics of it. So, knights, like he said, you could not apply to be a knight. It was in your family. So if your dad was a knight and you were the firstborn son, you would be a knight. If you were the secondborn, nope. If you were a girl, nope. So firstborn son, as long as your dad was a knight. And it started from a young age. So if Blake knew that he was the firstborn son, he was going to school to be a knight from age 7 on. So he would have a regular childhood up until age 7, where he would go to the castle and he would live with a foster family. And then he would, thank you. He would live with his foster family until he was the age of 14, where he would get his sword. So from 7 to 14, he would be training. So he would kind of learn how to become a knight. So if you, for example, me, I went to Emporia State to go to school to be a teacher. So while I was at Emporia State, I was learning how to become a teacher. So a knight would basically go to knight school and would learn how to become a knight. So how to use a sword, the codes of chivalry, so how to be honorable, how to be trustworthy, all that kind of stuff. And then at age 14, they would get their sword. And from then on, it was training. It was learning how to fight. And at the age of 21, you were what? Knighted. You became a knight. And from then on, either up until your death or up until the king's death, you were a knight. And then, so if a king did die and somebody else came in, they can choose to keep you, or they can let you go, and you would just go back to living life as a serf. So, any questions about life as a knight? No? You may not know this, but there are celebrities that have been knighted. Did you know that? Lots of celebrities, even former presidents. So what I want you to do is we are going to use Padlet. Has anybody ever used this before? This is like an interactive bulletin board for you guys. So the link is on Google Classroom. I believe it says Celebrity Knights or Famous Celebrity Knights Padlet link. You're going to go to that link, and here is what you're going to do. So one person that I know from history that has been knighted is President Ronald Reagan. So it opens this box. Let's see how you spell Reagan. So I have the name, the year they were knighted. Former U.S. President Ronald Reagan was knighted in 1989. Oh boy. He was knighted by the Queen Elizabeth. And then I will find a picture of Ronald Reagan being knighted. So here's one. Should think I haven't saved already. So then I will add the picture. So if you highlight down at the bottom, it shows you all the stuff that you can add. So I'm going to add a picture, choose a file, Reagan. So that's what you're going to do. You're just going to add the picture, and then when you click out of it, it will post. So then once you open the Padlet, you guys should all see Reagan. It might take a little bit to load, but is anybody having trouble with the link? It's on Google Classroom, so not Docs. Go up to the little grid there, and click on Classroom, and then click on our class, which should be W1 World History. Nope. Yep, right there. And then you'll see the castles, and then scroll down. It should be, yep, that one right there. You're welcome. Anybody else need help with getting the link? Okay, so
Jana, so now Google somebody who's been knighted.
the what? Oh, right there. There's a little pink circle with a plus in the bottom right hand corner. Oh. Did you have a question, Mark?
Do you want us to just get a picture of that?
Sure. Tatum, did you get the Padlet open? Okay. Oh, yep, there it is. All right. When you're finished, if you recognize names up here, great. However, most of you probably won't. There are a bunch of famous actors. Bill Gates, you guys probably know who he is. If you want, take a look and see who these people are. So if you don't know who Patrick Stewart is, you can look him up, see what he's an actor, but see like what kind of movies he was in. Sure, yep, just one works. If you want to do another one, you can.
probably be easier to look up a list first. So if you want to go all, and then put here instead of someone, so erase someone, then put celebrity, so CELEBRITY. And it should give you a list. So, yeah, you'll probably have to do their name first before you get. You can pick one of those, just look up a list of people, and pick one, and then you can search to find their picture. Some might even have one on there already.
Take a picture.
Okay, which one? That one. Okay, did you save it?
Save it.
Yes, you have to save it. Did that like download it?
I don't know how it looks with HYocum, so no idea. I don't like Chromebooks, so I don't figure this stuff out.
Okay, about 2 more minutes to get those up. Jim Carrey was, I didn't know that.
What if you can't find an image that would help you united? We found a comic. A cartoon.
Probably not, just because I'd like to get the picture of them. So if you don't have a picture of them being united, that's okay. That was oh wait, Clint Eastwood? Is that who you're looking for? It would just be like one of those. Yeah, that's fine.
What? Should make that. She's a bottle, but I don't know.
Oh, we can find one.
Yes,
I cannot get a picture.
that's okay. When you are finished, you're gonna like half close your Chromebook again for me so I know that you're done.
Hey, if you click on that, it'll show a picture.
On Bob Hope.
It's not.
Is that who you did?
Yeah. Big.
Big.
So lots of good ones on here. We have Elton John. Do you guys know who he is? He was a famous singer. In the 80s, he was kind of known for his fashion. He always had the big colorful glasses. He sang songs like Rocket Man, Tiny Dancer. Anybody? Is that way before your time? Too far before? Clint Eastwood. He started a lot of Western movies. Do you guys know who he is? His son is also an actor. He's kind of been in a few movies. Bob Hope. He was like a famous television, he was a television producer as well as a host. Real big in the 80s and 90s. You guys know who he is? Jim Carrey. You guys know who he is, right? The Mask. What are some other movies? Bruce Almighty. Liar, or just Liar. Yeah, he's in a lot. Patrick Stewart, you guys probably know him from the Harry Potter movies. If you've seen those, he's in a few. As far as other movies, I'm not sure. He's also does a lot on Broadway. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I don't
He's in one of them, because I've seen an interview with him about it. Anyways, Sean Connery is another famous British actor. League of Extraordinary Men. Have you seen that? It's a classic. It's good. But, okay, so just to kind of show you that celebrities also have been knighted. So in this video, they talk about how to identify knights. What do they use to identify knights? What's their identity? How do you know?
Coat of arms.
The coat of arms, right. So every family in this European time period, they did not have last names yet. So when the coat of arms developed, that's when people started getting last names. Most of the time people shared like first names. So if your dad's name was Charles, you were probably Charles II or whatever. So all of yours, well, I shouldn't say all of yours. If your name has some sort of English descent, even Anglo-Saxon, remember that was the Germanic tribe that hung out in England, you have a coat of arms. So I have one. It's pretty cool. But I want you guys to look yours up. So this is the last thing we're going to do today. You're going to find your family's coat of arms or the family crest. The website is houseofnames.com. There's no link to that. You'll just have to type that into your browser, but I got it up here for you. And then at the top left corner, you will search your last name, and most of the time it'll just give you a bunch of information. If they do not have your last name, you can look up your mom's maiden name. You can look up your first name, but start with last names first. Then you're going to come up with 3 interesting facts to share with the partner. So let me show you mine. Oops. So here, last name, HYocum. And there it is. Yeah, so you'll see that most of these, some of these actually have similar coat of arms, if not the same one. That just means somewhere along the line we came from the same area, the same baron of land. So
Can I get a different one?
what? You don't
Mine has
like it?
4 hearts on it.
I don't even have one for my first last name.
So if you scroll down, it'll give you some information. This is kind of cool. This down here in 1924, that's my great grandma. She migrated to Pennsylvania in 1924. This is Miss Goodwin. It's okay. Yes, ma'am. Bye. So Gertrude HYocum is my great grandmother. And she was 42 when her and my great-grandfather moved to Pennsylvania and then in 1924, and then in 1930 they actually moved to Kansas. So kind of cool that I actually found somebody. If your last name is more generic, like Smith, you're probably not going to find any relatives that you know, but HYocum's pretty unique, so, but all these other people, I don't know who they are, but. So, go ahead and look that up. You can find your last name or your mom's maiden name and find 3 interesting facts or pieces of information. Yes.
I know my grandma's maiden name. And my
Did it not have
I had one.
Linebarger on there?
It did not have my mom, but it did have Gardner, but that was too broad. But it did have Simon.
Well, yeah, you can keep going with your line of heritage.
You don't put a lot of stuff really past
Really?
me,
Is that like? Some of yours will even talk about how when your families immigrated to America, when they came to Ellis Island, and you said your last name, if the people didn't know how to spell it, they just spelled it some way. Or sometimes they would even change it. So if somebody comes with a German last name and comes to Ellis Island and says their name, they're like, no, you're going to be Joe Smith now. And that sounds strange, but it really is the truth. They would change people's names all the time. They would change the spelling of it. So when you came over to Ellis Island, you had like a whole new identity.
So we just look on here until I start your stuff.
Get 3 facts to share, or 3 things that are interesting.
Okay, so this one, oh, no, not yet. It's just, you'll just, have them in your head. So what's this one?
My mom and my dad never
Oh, we can look up the other one too.
I don't know what to spell Calvin.
I'm not sure either, miss.
I feel like I want to be on Facebook to look it up on my mom.
Oh, yeah, no. Lots of interesting stuff for your last name, though.
Yeah, I have like famous people, I guess.
Did you find anything on studio? Nope. Studio, but there was stuff for Alan, I'm sure.
Theodore.
I just looked
You may
up
have
like
the
different spellings on my neck. John's last name that came from Alabama. It could be Lindbergh, Lindenberg, Lineberger,
Yeah, lots of different.
Scotland. Why do we gotta put hearts on that?
And
Leave the hearts on there.
When you're finished, you can share those 3 interesting facts with a partner. Also, you guys can look at each other's coat of arms, because they're all going to be a little different.
What's yours?
Nope.
I have like, since I have 2 names, I looked up both of them. Yeah, I have both Richardson and Church that I go by. Because my parents never got married, so I have probably been Woodward. I don't know how to spell Calvin. Spell it Cal.
It's an Irish name, but I don't know. My mom is like completely English, and my dad has his I have no idea what
Are you buying it?
that's for the
She doesn't know.
When you know how to spell your names, which one I spell.
Which are the first ones?
Does anybody want to share, like, where their name comes from? Shyla? Let's see, your last name's Weimer, is that how you pronounce it?
It came from the local affairs in Vienna.
Oh,
Okay. Vienna, Austria.
Yeah.
Austria. So that would be like Austria and Germany kind of have the same people. So
Yeah,
it'd
and
be
my
like
name is more German. than
more
English.
German than English. Yeah. So like my name is Anglo-Saxon, so that means we come from England, but it's Germanic tribes. So my last name is German. Kaden, read. Where does that come from?
It says it was first found in Northumberland. I don't know how.
What? What is that place? Northumberland. I wonder where that's at. Did you look that up?
I don't know.
Northumberland. That's fancy. Audrey.
I don't know how to say it. It's like.
Which one? Essex?
Yeah, that.
England. Huh. That is really neat. Cool. So did you guys enjoy this activity? Did you get to enjoy looking up family heritage, your coat of arms? I always think that's pretty cool. So So,
Some reason I found one for a different spelling of my name last week, but now for my current spelling. So I'm like,
are they different?
yeah, there's different
Like that.
spellings of Langbacher because it's a German or
Right.
American surname.
Yeah.
So then when I chose the answer was the first one that came out,
Okay.
which is a logo surname,
Okay.
right?
Cool.